on Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph, and you had a handy dandy sheet from last week.
You sent it along.
Okay, good.
Clear as a bell.
Clear as a bell. All right, Rob, you got yours, and also brought this little handy dandy picture here, little picture book of Mishnayos. Okay, I don't know. Everybody here has got some turban and long ropes for some reason. That's what you have to do to put it.
You can spare one.
There you go. Sure, of course.
Thank you.
All right. So here we're going to go. So this is the 39 Malachos, and you notice it calls it 40 minus 1, and we have a chance, maybe we'll talk about why it calls 40 minus 1 at the end and not 39, which would be the normal way to count. There's a lot of drash about that, not quite sure if it's real shot. But it's 39 Malachos, and they're Av Malachos, and you will remember from last week that to be chayiv for Malacha, you have to have the paradigm has to have been in the Mishkan. So we're going to look at all the examples of items that were that were malachos that were there to do in the Mishkan, or they needed to get to the process of making the Mishkan, including a number of precursor different steps. And the first 11 items are going to be what's called Sidur de Pas. This is the order of baking bread. The equivalent in the Mishkan was actually not baking bread, because the baking bread happens after the Mishkan is up and running. Well, actually, we mentioned last week a machloket, you may remember, according to Rav Haigon and a few others, the 39 malachos may have been paradigms of what they used for the avoda in the Mishkan, right? But that's where the minority opinion. Most of the Mefarshim say it's about what was needed to build the Mishkan or set it up. Even if the Mishkan needed to be repaired, that's also considered setting up and preparing for it. So, the first 11 items are therefore were needed to make the samamonim, the dyes that were used to color the different fabrics, the different wools, and the different skins, maybe, probably not skins as much as the wools and the curtains and the covers, into different colors. Tchelet, argaman, tolat shani, well, that may have been different things, and so forth. So it says the Mishnah as follows. Avot, and there are 11 of them. Avot malacha arbam chaseracha. So number one is hazoreya. Zoreya is, of course, planting. Zoreh is planting. Choresh is plowing, right?
Yeah.
Number three is hakotzer, which is really harvesting. Okay, and well, let's go through the 11. We'll take a look at charts. They all make sense to us. After that, the next one after kotzer, cutting it down, and this is detaching from the ground. Is ma'amer, is going to be bundling them up. Okay, here we go. So bundling them up. In other words, you put all the harvested wheat and grain into a bundle and stack them up, and then you have after that dash is how they translate dash here. Threshing. Okay, I'll show you the picture what threshing is. Not threshing. Threshing.
I always say it wrong.
I know.
I always say it wrong.
Zoreh is winnowing, and I will show you the picture of that in a moment. Borer is separating, and that becomes a very important malacha that happens today, even without us being in the fields. So after we've done this separating and getting rid of the junk and leaving behind the parts that we need, which is all really part of Dash, Zoreh, Borer, part of really the three different parts. They're really all very much related. Dash is the threshing, which was a way to kind of separate the parts of the junk from parts of the grain. They would kind of stamp on top of it, or they would pull a wagon around it, or a type of a sledge on top of it. I'll show you the picture in a moment. Oh, I'm sorry. Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph. Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph on the bottom. Okay. Okay. The bottom. It's about. See the Mishnah. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Sorry there. So Zoreh, Borer. Zoreh, as we said, was winnowing, which you throw the stuff into the air and the chaff flies away, and then Borer. This is Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph. Borer is really separating by hand. All of these three items were meant to remove the non-desirable parts of the wheat, to leave behind the parts that were the grain, the actual kernel of the grain. Okay, so once again, it's either going to be threshing, it's winnowing, and then it's separating, or however they translate borer. Borer is selecting, separating. Then you've gotten down, so you have the kernel. So what are you going to do with the kernel of wheat? Hatochen, you're going to grind it. Hamaraked, maraked is you're going to what's before in Marakkid is sifting. Sifting.
Sounds a lot like Borer a bit, but maybe it's more
Yeah,
fine,
it's
more fine than Borer.
correct. It's after it's been ground. You're still sifting it. Correct.
It's a strainer here.
It's straining.
Strainer.
Correct.
The machine.
You're right. It is. There's
tool.
related.
The tool.
Okay. V'halosh is going to be kneading, and ofe, and that is baking.
Right.
Now, if this is, by the way, this all apply to dyes and plants. But it's really written in the form of what would happen for making bread, right? And as I told you when we read it, it's called Sidur de Pas. Even though in the Mishkan, what is used to be prepared for the Mishkan is really a process of planting plants, harvesting plants, cutting plants, getting rid of the junk in the plants, and so that you're left with a piece of the plant that could make the dye. Go over to Pioneer Village, you'll see them doing this kind of stuff in the vegetable patch or the plant patch.
They decided not to use that.
So they decided not to do that, really because the Gemara felt this was something people could identify with,
Right.
even though it really takes it away from the origins of what the Mishkan is all about, right? And they all make sense. They all make sense except for one of them, which is the farthest apart between grain and between plants, and that is lush. Lush is kneading. Right, all the challah bakes, what are we really doing? The challah bakes that people do is really not challah bakes; it's really kneading. Then they take home the challah and bake it themselves.
Right.
So kneading is you got to take the dough and then put it in with
Right.
water and mix it up. Now, what would be comparable if you have a plant and you're trying to make a dye? There is no real kneading, but it's actually putting it into water and having the colorant disperse among the water itself and be absorbed.
Yeah, but here, in the explanation, it says mixing it with a liquid to form a dough or a paste. So
Right, correct.
maybe they mix.
Whatever it's
maybe
what-
it formed a little kind of paste with the dyes, or who knows? I don't know.
So it might have become a paste. It might have been a paste that would stay, correct?
Yeah, maybe.
But the bottom line was it's not the same as kneading.
No,
Part of
for
kneading
sure.
is knocking it down and putting it together and making different forms. But the Gemara understands that the equivalent of lush for any kind of item is going to be really mixing it with water. It doesn't have to be the kind of vigorous kneading that you normally think about. Okay? So to kind of use this little bit of picture page here you got the guy planting, Zoreah. Okay, this is Choresh. Okay. By the way, just to kind of, we said this last week, just kind of remind you about what for the first and second question the Gemara is going to be. If this is in the order of it takes place, really, what should come first? Choresh
Right.
should come before Zoreah,
Right.
correct? And actually, the Gemara is going to say that, well, in Israel, the land was so hard that before you could even plant, you had to actually, before you actually had to plow after you planted. So there was a triple procedure: plowing, planting, and then plowing the seed into the ground. And the second plowing, even though you might have thought it's Zoreah, it's planting, it's really still considered plowing. Okay, which by the way is one of the answers why it's 40 minus 1, because you see what I've just done, I've just added to a second plowing. They're tricky. Okay, so that's one of the answers that Mepharshim suggests. Anyways, that's 1 and 2. Then what do I have over here? Number 3 is, this is Kotzer, harvesting, I hope.
Right.
Okay, Kotzer, this is Ma'amir, bundling up. And by the way, you can bundle up a lot of things, right? Could you bundle up, they could use this mine salt, they could bundle up salt, they could bundle up, the question whether it has to be Gedula Karka or not. And then what we have over here, this is Dosh, this is threshing, and this is the way it was actually done back in the day. They had this little sledge here, and then of course, I'm sorry. Threshing board.
That's the correct Lucian.
Okay,
That's what it is?
which, yeah, and then, okay, it had little things sticking out on the bottom like spikes or something, and then the docks pulled it around. Or you could do it manually, I suppose, and thresh other things down as well.
Depends how
Okay?
much you have.
Depends, that's right. You could have a power drill, you could have a manual drill, right? You use a, et cetera, et cetera. Then that takes us up to Zora, which is winnowing, throwing it up in the air. You have here, I can't read it upside down, Rockade. No, Borer. This is Zora and Borer, this is separating. If you know what he's doing, he's taking out the stones, the pebbles,
Larger.
from where, not so much larger, but the part that he doesn't want
Okay.
from the food. So after he's thrown it up, after they've actually separated it here and they've thrown it up in the air, there still may be some impurities, such as pebbles or dirt, and they're manually pulling it out. So that becomes important in the discussion about Borer, whether you're pulling out the garbage from the food or the food from the garbage, whether you're doing it by hand, whether you're doing it manually, whether you're doing it by machine.
They
Okay.
wouldn't have a mesh?
They have that later on.
Maybe
That's the next one.
Next
That's the next one. Okay.
It's fine.
Right, and after that is Tochin, which is grinding.
Right.
Right, grinding. And by the way, the Gemara discussed this, says that grinding does not only have to be food. You could be grinding, for example, metal. Right? There are like a grinder today, like the tool which is a grinder. So anything that's going to so it doesn't only have to be edibles. Anything that's going to be grinding something off or taking something off, you could be grinding.
Isn't it Kedula Karka, like in that particular case?
So it actually not. These are Gedula Karka. This may not be Gedula Karka. I'll give you another example. By the way, it could be Gedula Karka wood. Right, you're planing a door. Would probably be considered tochet. Would be considered tochet. Okay, and then we have over here. This is maraked, which is sifting. Okay, and you see there's a sifter. Question is, what about if you did it with something that wasn't really a sifter? You used something else. For example, the Gemara will talk about. I think it's rabbinic. Using a coin sorter. Now, we don't have coin sorters anymore. You take your coins over to Sobeys or the bank or something. But the basic idea of a coin sorter is it separates larger coins and smaller coins. So in a primitive way, the larger coins would get held back. So therefore, if you wanted to separate larger pieces and smaller pieces, instead of using a sifter, if they used this kind of contraption, they had the kind of contraption, right? But it's not really meant for sifting. It's meant for coins. So that's like a shinoi, okay? So that may only be a rabbinic prohibition. Then we have over here, this is lush, where the guy is kneading, right? And this is here, this is ofa, this is baking. The equivalent, of course, for dealing with the summer morning would be not baking, but cooking. And then, and that takes us through the 11 items that are for Sidur de Pas, or preparing the summer morning. Okay? So the first 11, and you'll see they all run in chronological order. So that's the first 11, they all go together. Yes?
Does that guy have pious?
Is he pious? Punch is pious?
Does he have pious?
Of course he's got pious.
Okay, I don't want to make sure.
But the real question is why he has a face. This is like if we really were religious, they wouldn't put faces on this because you can't make it.
He's wearing a Dover Shtreimel, isn't he?
I don't know what he's wearing. He's wearing a turban.
I think is he pious?
Yeah, they are. Of course they're pious. What are we talking about? Why shouldn't they have pious? Why shouldn't we have payas? Why shouldn't they have payas? Why would we suspect they wouldn't have payas? The Torah says, "Lo sakivu pas roshchem." Right? Yes, of course they have payas. Okay. All these guys, but actually, this is a very bad kind of thing because then kids read this, they think you have to look like this to keep Shabbos, and if you don't have payas,
if you don't look like this, then you don't have to.
No, it means it would belong in an ancient world and it doesn't exist today, and so forth and so on.
Pictures of school books of Moshe Rabbeinu in a Stramo and a Bekisher.
Oh,
That's correct.
lot in the Smithstramo.
Yeah.
By the way, I think would we have this here about where you put the bread on the oven?
Yeah.
Okay.
We talked about that.
Okay, so there's your laugh of bread sitting on the
But
top.
you're right about the pictures. I was looking, my grandchildren have like the 10 tests that Abraham went through.
They're all wearing
And
same
you
thing.
see everybody up, but you never see Abraham's face, right?
That's fine.
Oh,
Okay.
you don't see because of that?
No, they don't put the face in.
100%.
It's okay.
You see all the 10.
My grandchild has a book about David HaMelech, and he's wearing tefillin in every picture. Okay, he's wearing talis and tefillin when he goes to battle. They're all the soldiers are wearing talis and tefillin. Okay, every moment. Okay, all right. Maybe he did. I don't know. Why not? Okay. Now those are the first 11. So far we're good. So this is called. It's either called the Samamonim, the preparation of Samamonim, or we call it Sidur de Pas, Seder, Shel Hapat, Shel bread. Okay, that takes us all to Ofen. Now we come to a part about preparing skins. Okay, so the first part was about plants. The next part is about preparing the skins, and the skins covered the parts of the Mishkan, parts of the Ohel, and so forth. And they needed wool in some cases, and as you'll see as we go through it, or actually this is really preparing the wool, I should say. The skins we haven't come. This is preparing the wool. Hagozes esatzemer. Gozes is of course shearing the wool off the sheep. Okay, that's number one. Malabno is whitening it. How they translate it, bleaching it. Okay, which actually would also be considered washing. Even washing in water would be considered malabain. It's not just putting a white color on. Menafzo is going to be combing it out. Tsovo is dyeing. Now that you had the dyes, which you did in the first 11 malachos, you're going to dye the wool. Right? It's not going to just be white and black. There's different colors.
Is there a difference in the punishment if you over on the Ab Malach as opposed to
The Tolda? No. There was a difference in the fact that if you do it Rabbanan,
right?
right? Okay.
But I assume that You know, we just talked about malabain or washing.
Right.
I assume there's no difference. I assume washing is a toldav malabain, and
Yes.
therefore it's just the same.
Yeah, though I think the washing may have been actually with the way they would have whitened it simmer. I don't know that they necessarily use bleach like we have it, but it's really washing it to whiten and get rid of the dirt. Okay,
Like the women used to do with the water.
like the women used to do with the water.
Not the
Correct.
waters.
Now they did have primitive cleansers and detergents like Natron and other probably minerals, but they were fairly primitive. Yeah. So and they were, the older the sheep got, the dirtier the wool became. So even if it's even if you're going to shear it off the sheep and take it right away, it's still going to be fairly dirty. You've gone to the zoo and you see sheep, right? Maybe you're a farm boy. I don't know. You grew up with these things. So that maybe nobody said yes. Okay. Goza is simmer. Malabno is whitening or bleaching. Menafzo is combing it out. Tzovo is coloring. That's pretty good. Tove is this is spinning it. You're now going to spin it on a spinning wheel, and you're going to spin it directly into make threads. Okay, and then we have the next few items are pretty tough to understand. Mesach. They're about working with a loom, and I'll show you the pictures when we finish maybe the whole sequence of them. But you've got Mesach, Osa Shtei Batinirim, and you have Oreg. Oreg is actually weaving two together. I'll show you the pictures. They'll be a little more clear, but they're actually very difficult malachas to understand. And the unusual part is every part of the weaving process seems to have a separate av malacha.
It looks like we should all be the same, whether you're weaving it.
You'll see, but they're distinct parts in the weaving process. These were big looms.
Yeah, but
Okay, we'll ask Hank. Hank is going to give us a description how they used to do it back in the day. Okay, yes.
In what? 10
And
minutes, 15 minutes?
start knitting wools. You're gonna. Okay, if it was back in the day, he would take us on a tour, right? Okay, but anyway, so I'll show you what the picture is, because otherwise it's extremely hard to understand. But just understand that these deal with the actual weaving process, not sewing necessarily, weaving. So you have Tava is the spinning. You've got Mesach is threading the loom. You have Osa Shtei Bati Nirim there are two threads, and it's hard for me to even describe it until I show you the picture. And Oreg is going to be the actual weaving of the threads back and forth. Shtei Chutim, you have the two threads that'll hold the weave. And then we have Potsea Shtei Chutim. Potzea Shtei Chutim is actually you have to either thin the threads or untwist the threads. Something happened in the weaving process that you need to go back a step. Too many threads came together, were too fat or too tight, or you have to undo it. So in order to go ahead, you need to kind of either cut a thread or thin out a thread, or maybe there was two knots that came together, right, next to each other, and therefore it's a fat piece. So you want to move where the knot is. So that's all about Potzea. Potzea Shtei Chutim. That's all about the weaving process. And maybe I'll stop there before we go to the actual sewing process and just show you what the pictures are to make it a little more clearer. Okay, so the easy part is, of course, is gozes, that's cutting the sheep. This is malabain, this is washing or bleaching, that's the easy stuff. And then we come here, we have menafetz is either combing out or untangling. And then we have here, this is sovea, this is dyeing. That's pretty easy. And then we have tave is, what did I translate tave again?
Spinning, twisting, into a thread.
Okay, spinning it into threads. Now it's not the greatest picture because it looks like the threads are coming off of here. I'm not quite sure how this guy's doing this.
we had that in the Gemara once with the thing you turn.
Right, a spinning wheel.
Yeah,
We had a shuttlecock that was thrown back and forth, right.
Something that
That's
you just
for
no, you
spin- that's for-
spinning.
No, weaving is
Weaving,
the shuttlecock.
okay, okay.
We had it once. I sent you some stuff. It was,
Right.
I forget what it was.
Whether,
called.
how do you do it that way, correct. But,
Yeah.
but you could think of it as a spinning wheel. For those who don't remember the spinning wheels from, what was it, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White? I don't remember which one it was.
Hillbillies, Beverly Hillbillies.
But whatever it was, be the threads that you buy, right, are made of, if it's a wool thread, it's going to be made of different fabrics that are, the wool is spun together. And it's coming off of this. If those who remember the Chumash in Pashas Truma and Tetzaveh and Vayakal Pekud, they talk about the women who could tavuet hoizim. The Isha Chachma slave, the wise women, were able to spin the izim from the goats. And the Medrash says, anybody remember the Medrash about how wise these women were? Because how wise you have to be to spin. Every woman spun. They were able to spin it off of the sheep without actually shearing the sheep.
Yeah, they skipped all the
They skipped all the middle steps.
All the steps.
All the
with
middle
cleaning,
steps.
dyeing, washing.
Right, which I don't know how you do. But you can imagine you can do it, because if you go over to a sheep, you go to a farm in a zoo or something, and you pull on the sheep, you'll find loose fibers will come off of the sheep. That's loose wool fibers. And you,
The goats, you said, though. The goats is a
Well,
whole different- a
goats-
goat's not a sheep, I'll tell you
Goat
that.
has
goat has
small hair.
yes,
Yes,
correct.
very
Okay,
little.
that's why they were smart women. Okay,
They're
now.
very smart.
All right.
It talks about sackcloth.
Okay, so anyway, this is Taveh.
That
This
was
is
our logo, spinning wheel.
yeah. There we go. See.
There you go.
Okay. Well, sorry we're too late for you to take us back to Star Knitting Mill. All right. When was the last time you ran the mill here in Ontario?
It must be about 7, 8 years.
That's all?
More.
Oh, more. I bet it's probably more.
When did you
Oh,
finish?
no.
When did you
In-
We
start?
had, no, you're right. We had knitting machines doing knitting, but then we imported
Right.
ready-made merchandise.
Correct. So when was the last time you actually were knitting here in Ontario?
A knitting machine,
20 years ago?
no,
No?
not quite.
In
15 years ago.
78, I did a study on Parkhurst knitwear. You remember
Yeah.
Parkhurst, right? And they were just in 78 getting rid of all of their
Local
knitting
stuff.
machines.
And they had good machines,
And they had excellent machines.
flat machines,
Oh, there you go.
full-fashioned.
So,
78.
so we're, that takes it, that's how many years? That makes us 30, almost 40 years. 40 years too late, okay.
Hey,
All right, we'll have to take a trip to the Mideast, wherever it's coming from now.
how they still doing it.
Okay,
China.
let me change. Okay, so at any rate, this is Taveh, this is spinning. That's fairly
Spinning,
easy.
yeah, that's pretty
That's fairly easy for you to imagine. Then next one comes is Mesach, and that is actually setting the loom, right? How do they translate here, Mesach? Mesach is threading the loom, tying the thread to the front to the back roll. And they got some kind of crazy loom here. It's a vertical loom. There are different kinds of looms, and if you can see,
Sounds like it's just getting started. in
it's
other words.
correct,
Yeah, it's getting
right? But you're setting it up, and then you do need to have a cross part. So this will go through back and forth.
Not yet, maybe. Maybe
Not
the
yet,
next
right.
step.
And then the next step is what's called Mesach, what's called Shtei Bati Nirim, Hose Shtei Bati Nirim. Now this is the one that you have to really see to believe. This, I'm not sure people much can see this, but you've got what are called heddles, okay? So that, can't see it, maybe I'll pass it around for a minute, okay? I'll just take a look. This is the one on the bottom of page 103, top of 103, okay? And, let's see, I have another picture here. No, we can't really see it here.
We'll do our best.
Okay. I have a sheet that explains, but it doesn't really have a good picture of what these heddles are. But the point of it being, as you go through the loom, the thread has to go through to go up and down. So, so somehow the thread needs to go through, cross the other threads without falling down and up. So somewhere in the middle it has like a hole that keeps it together.
Pretty intricate for those days.
Yes.
Nice, all right.
Maybe we'll pass it around, Jonathan, when you've gotten a look, so everybody can get a look, okay? Sorry. It's 103, if you just want to take a look and just keep it going around and explain what it is, because it's really, there's a whole parak that just talks about this. It's extremely complicated to make sense of what what it is.
They've got two sets of threads.
Right,
And the other thread
Thing goes back and forth.
Goes through, and then
Right.
this goes up and down, and it goes like, intertwines.
right.
Shuttlecock.
Flying
The shuttlecock goes back and forth
Yeah,
between
back and
the,
forth, yeah.
between the
threads-
Shtei Bati
the threads go
Nirim.
up and down, so.
Right.
So,
Shuttlecock goes horizontally, must need something going
Yeah,
up
but
and
the
down.
There's like a ring that goes through and that has to go through. That's the Shtei
the
Bati
threads are
Nirim.
like this, and then the shuttlecock goes
not like
through, and
you
then
guys.
the threads go like this.
If Hank gave up the business, we're not
Our
planning.
slaves did.
The slaves.
Of course the slaves did it. So just take a minute while it goes around. That's the Shtei Bati Nirim.
Right?
And then as it goes around, we'll just, we have Oreg Shtei Chutim, and then Botzeh Shtei Chutim. And if you take a look at the picture, one is,
Longitudinal thread across.
Right.
Longitudinal.
so you're putting the thread back and forth,
Thick one.
right?
So what's the difference between 17 and 18?
17 is actually threading the loom, and then this is, Oreg Shtei Chutim is probably the other way. It's the latitudinal thread across
17 sounds
longitude.
like you're just getting started. You're just
Right.
setting the whole thing up.
Correct.
So maybe
17.
17 is, I see.
Making sure it's
Right.
attached to the roller.
Threading those pieces that go
Correct.
up and down.
Right. And then this
18
is,
setting the loom.
and oreg shtei chutim is actually putting
It's shuttle
back
through.
and forth,
The
right?
shuttle
1, 2, right? So the first one is just setting up the pieces, setting up the longitudinal one,
Once it go-
and every time you move the loom, you throw the shuttlecock
Through.
across and shuttlecock back and forth. So you got to do this. Actually, machlokas in the Gemara whether this is 1 or whether this is 1 and 2. What does 2 mean? Is it this way and that way? But the basic point of doing 2 is you've now solidified that part of the process. You can't do 1; it'll come out.
Yeah, you need
So,
2. Yeah,
so you need 2. Same thing with sewing, perhaps. Okay, so that's already the shtei bati nirim. And the oreg is actually weaving. That's the actual weaving back and forth. And then potzea shtei chutim. There's a whole machlokas what that is among the mefarshim. What it actually really is all about. You have this. It's going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And somewhere along the line, you need to attach another thread. The thread runs out. So what happens? And if it's one thread that you attach to the other, it'll be a bit of a bump. It's not so bad. What happens if you kind of keep moving along the line and then you run out at the very same place? So you're going to end up having like a bump. So what you end up doing is you probably have to undo one to kind of maybe make, instead of having 2 bumps that are next to each other, make 3 bumps, one here, and one here, so that they're offsetting each other. But that's why you're undoing it as part of the process, because inevitably there will be some imperfection because no thread is infinitely long. Somewhere it's going to have to be merged and melded and tied to another thread. Okay?
You tie the ends together.
You tie the ends together. But if you're tying the ends together too many in the same place, right, you're going to end up having too many, I don't know what you would call it, too many knots sitting next to each other, which will just stand out. Okay? So
That is a good, those are good pictures.
this is a good picture, right? It's hard to explain it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
once again, so and if you look here, this I think you can't see from where you are. This is the oreg. You see the guy. This is a vertical kind of hand loom. They're putting it back and forth, right? That's
Horizontal.
right.
Manual
It's manually, and then this is potzea, where it looks like it's not clear what he's cutting, but he's made a couple of cuts because he's got to reset them. So potzea, now you're going to say, well, this looks like it's breaking something.
It does.
It is breaking something. You'll see a number of the malachas from here on until the end about breaking in order to fix it. So anytime that you are destroying, it's not a malacha. But if you're destroying in order to build, right, we'll have in a couple lines, soter, breaking down in order to build. Simply breaking something down to be destructive is not a malacha min Torah. But if you're breaking something down to build something like the house across the street, they took the house down to make a better house. That's soter amanas livnos. So this is the same thing. If you're potzea here, that's part of the process to make it good, because otherwise something happened here that was wrong. Either it was too thick or too thin, or you have to untwist it, or a weave didn't happen correctly, and now you got to undo it in order to make sure that you keep moving up on terms of the weave. So this is about weaving, right? It's not the same as sewing. Weaving is a very distinct and very unique process. Okay, it's a very specialized process, and it's a very complicated process. And the application to the modern world, which is not weaving, is not as direct as a number of the other malachos because it's so specialized. Okay, so anyways, that's about weaving fabric or weaving wool. Okay, we're still into the wool. We're still into the forming the different kinds of curtains that would be for the Mishkan or for the sides of the Mishkan. Okay.
When they had the Industrial Revolution in Britain, they automated all of this.
The looms.
The looms.
Yeah. Yes. And but even if they're automated, it's basically the same process.
Right.
It's just moving. It's
Very,
all
very
automated,
fast.
correct? Right.
Very, very fast.
I'm not sure the process is much different today than it is here,
Well, that's
except
the
that it's
process.
automated and it's done and it's delegated to third world countries and it's quick and and machines do things, repetitive actions better than humans do, right? And so forth. But the actual process of weaving and keeping a stitch together is really going to be what it is, right? Right. This is I don't know if this is just stamped or this is a broad weave. Right, broadcloth is also a weave. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yes, right. Well, it depends on the shirt. This is probably broadcloth. Okay, whatever it is. So, or depends on however your suit is made and so forth. So most stuff that we're going to have, unless it's stamped out today in polyester, is still going to be woven one way or another. You're thinking about probably blankets or throws or sweaters, but the truth is most of the garments we're wearing right, are being woven or else being blown out by polyester. Okay, so that's all about making these curtains, and that has to be done. Then where are we up to now? So then we have kosher ve'amatir. We have tying, and we have untying matir. Now the Gemara is actually going to discuss where they had to tie and where they had to untie. Like what were they tying about? So the Gemara starts talking about there were holes in the curtains and they had to tie them and everything. The Gemara says that's ridiculous. You're going to make a mess of this, and this is for the base of Mikdash. The Gemara ends up concluding this was about catching the chalazon, the chilazon, that fish or snail that was used for the tcheles. Right? So they had to make nets to catch it. And what we believe it is, or what I believe it is, and many others believe it is a sea snail.
Yes.
However, they probably had to, bring them. They didn't all wash ashore. When they washed ashore, they were dead already. So you had to go out and put them together. Sometimes the net had to be expanded. So in order to expand the net, right, this is where you get the matir. You had to take two smaller nets, untie the fabrics or untie the netting, and net them together and tie them together. So you have kosher, and you have this. Remember the kosher, right?
Yeah.
Kosher and
Matir.
I just lost that. Kosher and matir, right? Kosher and matir is tying and untying, and the knot, had to be a strong, permanent knot. That's why what we call it requires what's called a kesher shokayama. It has to exist. So you probably have heard that you can make a bow, right? But you can't make a double knot. Right, you can't make a knot that's really a square. I don't know what you call them, but you can't make a knot that's really going to last.
Yeah.
So you make a double knot. You sometimes you tie your shoes and you find it falls into a double knot. You start swearing because it's hard to untie it. That's a real knot, and there are other kinds of knots. Okay, so that's let's go through a little more, and we'll show you more of the pictures. Okay, so that's about kosher and matir. Then we have this is now about sewing. Okay, so sewing is not the same as weaving, but you have tofer shtei tfiros. You're sewing two pieces of fabric together, right? Like any stitch, like a stitch here, whether it's an invisible stitch or good stitch. This is even today the same thing. You're going to weave the fabric. So the only thing that's happened today is we don't really weave fabrics. Sometimes the cheap fabrics are polyester. Well, I guess it's woven. I guess it is woven. It's just woven with polyester thread.
Yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise
Okay.
it'd be like vinyl, a sheet.
Well, maybe. Yeah, I suppose so. Right.
So where did
Like
they
a
tie?
raincoat.
The curtains were curtains, right? Each
So,
curtain
but
was separate.
each curtain was separate, and they were
There
tied
was
together.
hooks.
They were hooks, correct, but they were still tied together. Pieces that were tied together. So there was tying that goes on, and then you have to make two stitches together. Maybe the ends were tied off. I don't remember. Let's see what the picture in a moment is. And if you didn't make two stitches, right, then it would come apart. You can't make one stitch. It's actually complicated what it means. And I told you this before. Same thing with weaving. Is one stitch, two stitches? Is it a stitch, or is a stitch back and stitch forth, or is, for example, let's take a button. Okay, speaking to a male audience. Okay, so. Well, it's not a good example of a button because the button is a roundabout, right? But let's say it's this button here. So is the buttonhole is that a one stitch?
Right.
Is that one stitch, or is it one stitch really two around? Right? What's going to really hold this?
Through and then back down.
Through and back and through and back. So that's why two stitches are, right? So that's a machloket among, I think, that we've shown them, whether it's one or two, based upon discussion in the Gemara. But at any rate, it's got to be something that's going to be a stitch that's really going to hold. I'm sure if you're doing buttons, or someone's doing a button for you, you'll do more than two stitches, but that's the minimum it's going to hold, right? Right. When you see, by the way, it's held together by two stitches, you know it's time to get it replaced or fixed. So that's... It's hanging by a thread. There we go. So this is where we're back again. Kosher and matir, and tofer shtei tfiros, and korea amanas litfar. Then this is ripping, in order to do, and they have in brackets shtei tfiros. Now why would you rip stuff apart? So the Gemara says, and I'll show you the picture in a moment, and I don't fully understand this, and maybe someone who has experience, we're going to call Hank here in a moment, but the way it says is that if you had like a hole, right, you got a hole, let's say, I don't know, bug got into the hole, moth got into the hole, so if you kind of sewed it together, just the hole, it would pucker up.
Yes, it would.
Right, it would pucker up. I think this is what it's really trying to say. So what's the best way to kind of ensure that it doesn't pucker up? If you extend the hole over a longer period of time, then you can spread around the pressure and reduce the pucker.
Invisible mending.
Well, I guess it's less than invisible mending. Invisible mending, I know it's less than that. I'll show
Can you
you.
explain what you, I'm not sure what you're talking about?
Okay.
Sorry.
Here we go. That's why we brought this little handy dandy book here. Okay. Okay. First of all, here's kosher and matzah. There's a guy making the net, right? Net is going to catch all his halas and fish. Okay. Then we have over here. This is tofer. I can't read it. Okay. This is tofer, and this is karamanas litfor. You have a hole. This I'll show you very clearly. You have a hole here, and what has the guy done? He's made a slit so that he can spread around the pressure of the hole of repairing the hole, which will hold it tighter and probably not make it pucker as much. It's not going to be a perfect fit, but by spreading that around, he's going to reduce the fact that there's going to be an imperfection in the fabric. That's what it means. So matir is, or not matir, it's korea, ripping in order to resew. Ripping a garment, right? Ripping a garment is not going to be a creative act. What's ripping a garment is destructive. But if you're ripping it in order to kind of sew this straight, and apparently they felt this was a better way than simply invisible mending, stitching in the middle, which is probably what we would have done. They felt it was better to rip it more and sew it straight than trying to just mend the circle.
When it's round, it's hard to deal with.
Correct, but I'm not sure this is any better. This is not in the middle of a seam.
How is this related to making the
Curtains.
uriot, right?
The uriot, yes, the uriot, yes.
Is this part of exactly what they did to make a...
Ostensibly, yes, correct. We weren't there, but we believe, this is our tradition, that these were the items or processes that were needed to build in the Mishkan. I actually need to believe that's correct. I'm sure it's correct.
I'm not denying it. I'm just wondering, how would it fit it? How would this one in particular...
So the Gemara says, the Gemara discussed that, said, why would this happen? Let's say a darna, think of this as a moth, not a moth, a cat, a moth larvae, right? That the moth eats a piece of wool. It's not uncommon, right?
Mothballs.
Well, they didn't have mothballs, correct? Okay.
No, but I'm saying
But
today.
I'm sure. I don't know if I'm sure, but you may have seen this where you've had a sweater that you put away and you pulled it out after many years and you found there's a hole in it, right? So that the same thing, and this is once again the Mishkan. They didn't want to have holes sticking around, so they kind of figured a way to darn it up. Now you say, why didn't they just replace the whole panel? I guess this was a way to do it. This was ongoing. That's why I said, even though most of these things are pre-building the first Mishkan, it was an ongoing process. Right. So every time they had to set it up, before the Mishkan was reconstituted, they had to make sure it was okay.
So this was only in the Midbar days, right?
Yeah. Right. And this goes back to the fact that right in Vayakhel, when the Mishkan is put together, the Psukim at the beginning of Vayakhel talk about Shabbos. So Shabbos, the Malach of Shabbos, is the same thing about the Malach of building Mishkan.
Right.
It's very logical. Okay.
So in other words, this is only for the 39 years that they were.
The Malachas were there for the first time they built the Mishkan, and in order to keep it in repair.
So for those 39 years only.
Yeah, because afterwards, the Mishkan exists when they come to Israel too.
Yeah,
but these become in other words, the paradigm for what are the malacha that you cannot do on Shabbos are the malacha that you needed to do to build the Mishkan, because of the confluence of the fact that Shabbos comes together with the building of the Mishkan.
Right.
Malacha.
Right. But
how long did it go on this way? I don't know. It's not that important. What's important?
It's irrelevant.
What's important? I don't imagine, by the way, that it changed very much over the course of Beit Rishon either. What changes is when Shlomo Melech builds a Beis HaMikdash, right, and you no longer have a tent, right, and you now have a building. There are certain changes in building structures, but Shabbos doesn't change.
Right.
Okay.
And you may have also needed Uriot in the Beit HaMikdash.
Maybe. Possibly, I don't know. Okay, but the point is, this is building the Mishkan. We're following the template of building the Mishkan, and I believe that not much changed between the actual building processes when they built the Mishkan from the first temple and probably down into the second temple, and even towards the days of the Mishnah, which is the end of the second temple. Okay. It's not like today that we know the cell phone that you have today is couldn't have been imagined 5 years ago, and so we couldn't imagine cell phones 30 years ago, right, and so forth. So technology.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So technology is leapfrogs continually in our society, but at one point things were more stable, right? Yeah.
They have chemicals now. They put into dye when you're dyeing cloth, and it keeps the moths away.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
Man,
Yeah.
the young trouble is very toxic.
That keeps a lot of other people away.
I don't understand why they would cut it to fix a hole, but anyway,
Why they would fix a hole?
they cut it that way, I don't know why they would do
Company we do
that.
business with.
But
Snap,
I'm
maybe
just saying,
I don't know why they would do it either.
I'm just being a comment.
That's why I said,
90 euros a gallon.
if this were my pants, right? If this were my set of pants or something, I would go to the tailor and have them do invisible darning over where the hole is, right? That's probably what we
Like you
do.
could just reinforce it without cutting it, what's the point of
Yeah,
cutting it?
I don't know.
Just throw
The
it
way
around.
I understand it from the Gemara is they felt this was a better way to make it straight without ripping out the whole fabric. So you rip more to spread out the pressure. I don't know. Okay.
Okay.
I can't really argue much more about that.
Ariga is a very, even the whole concept of Ariga and et cetera, and all those laws, I'm sure, very, very complicated.
Correct. I'm sure they're historically accurate, and there wasn't that much change between the days of the Mishkan and the days of the Mishnah, which is recreating what it was and saying these are 39 malachos. There is no one who argues with this. That's not true. You'll see there are discussions what's an av and what's a tolda, some of this, and there may be some overlap between two of them when we come to the skins in a moment. But this is the process.
Right.
Okay. I don't know what the process will be when they rebuild the temple. Yes. Okay. Speedily in our time. Now in Jerusalem, the new capital of Israel. Okay. Yes. But that's not going to change Shabbos one way or the other. This is actually very important because everything about Shabbos, down to today, is based upon an interpretation and application of what these 39 malachos are, whether it's going to be a rabbinic extension or it's going to be actually an oven atolda. For example, and maybe I don't know if I said this, and if I did, maybe I shouldn't say it again. But anytime you get you get a spot on your shirt on Shabbos, right? Did I say this? Okay, that's a good example where you're going to say, "Oh, look at that! I spilled some soup on my shirt. I got a little piece of gravy on my shirt." No, just go over to the sink and get a little water and wipe it out. That's actually malabain.
Yeah, clear.
That's not just the rabbinic malabain. It's probably the malabain that we just read. So that's an example of something that people don't even think about. You say, "What I really do?" Because you don't really look at that as cleaning. Cleaning means you take the shirt to the cleaner, you put it in the washing machine. But that really is a recreation of what happens there, and it probably is going to be exactly one of the 39. Sorry to tell you that. Okay, now. So you probably forget that I told you that, and it'll be shogeg, so it won't be that bad. Okay. All right, anyway, now, so this is all about the list about what we have until now, the fabric. So we had weaving the fabrics, we had processing the fabrics, we had we have sewing the fabrics, we have ripping the fabrics to resew them, and that takes us up to the next set, which is really about the skins that we use to cover the Mishkan. Now, this is something that we don't usually have skins. We still have fabrics today, but those of you who've ever had a leather coat, a leather jacket, or a mink, right? This is all about the skins. So skins are still, even our society, or these winter hats that are made with real animals, that's really a skin. So there still is application today. Now, Hatzad Tzvi. So this is 4 lines in the bottom in the Gemara. Now they did not really catch Tzvi deers in the Mishkan, but they had to catch, what kind of animal did they catch? Tchashim. All right, what is the tachash? Was this animal that, if you look in Sansino, the Sansino translation they call seals, right? Which they're known because they didn't know what this really was, and
In the midbar.
it was something in the midbar. Art Scroll translates chashim as tchashim. Okay, the tachash is the tachash because they don't know what it is. It was, according to the Medrash, and I can't tell you more than that, an animal that had a multicolored kind of skin or multicolored kind of fur. So therefore, it became very desirable and was very unique. And no one really knows what this is because the Medrash says after the days of the Midbar, can't find it. Okay, but whatever it was, these were animals that were roaming around. Think of them as some kind of antelope, gazelle, or whatever it was. It was obviously a kosher animal. It's a kosher type of wild animal, like a deer is. So the closest that they want to give an example that you could relate to is chasing a deer to catch the deer to be able to slaughter the deer, right?
Well, wouldn't the av be related to a tachash, and therefore we can't do the av anymore? I'm not saying we shouldn't do.
No different than making bread, and no different than a lot of other things.
Any other animal.
Right? No, the actual is there are 2 things here about malachos: pu'ula and tachli, the actual action and the purpose of the action. Okay. For example, some of those are very hard to understand. For example, choresh, plowing, is about softening up the soil. So let me give you an example. It is possible, for example, that ripping out weeds, not cutting weeds, ripping out weeds from the ground by the roots, by taking out those dandelions where you kind of go down and pull it out, may be choresh, plowing, because you're by getting those weeds out, you're softening the soil around it. But the key is to identify the pu'ula, the action, which is clearly trapping, and the tachlis is to trap the animal. So if you don't have the right animal, you got a different animal. Be whatever you're going to catch. Be the same thing and the application may be catching a bee, catching a fly, catching a mouse. I don't know. Okay. So tzad tzvi. So first thing is trapping a tzvi, and you had to trap it because you couldn't shoot them, you couldn't bow and arrow them because you wanted to shech them. So shochto is slaughtering it. You have to catch it, then you slaughter it. And I think shochto might even be just not even slaughtering to make it kosher, any type of killing the animal. Mafshito is skinning it. You're removing the skin from the animal. Molcho is salting it. Okay, salting it is really putting chemicals into the skin to cure it. And then the next one is ma'abed is oro. Ma'abed is the same thing, and that's the Gemara is actually going to ask that. Ma'abed is working on it. So one is called salting it, and one is called really just working the skin or changing the skin, but they're really two forms of the same thing. Salting the skin is not the salt that we use, right? Well, maybe it is the salt that we use, but it might be other chemicals as well. And ma'abed is also tanning it, which is using some kind of chemical mix to ensure that the skin will remain pliable and also be usable. And that's still today. So mamachko, so that's not so much that clear about salting, and that's less applicable for us, but the next are. What happens after you salted and tanned the skin? Mamachko is you're going to smooth it down. You want to smooth, in many cases, smoothing the hair off of the skin, or making the skin less rough on the inside, so it'll be smooth.
More general now for anybody.
Yeah, so correct.
Here we're talking about the skin, but there was anything.
Right, so it might be anything, for example, that could be smoothing down. Okay, and that's actually a lot of application on Shabbos. The next one is mechadcho, is cutting. Now this is not like it's not like kotzer, which was cutting off cutting grain, because that was just random cutting. Mechadcho means you're accurately cutting something. You want this skin to be in a specific shape and a specific size. So it's a very clearly demarcated kind of cutting. So that's mechadcho. What else did I leave? Kosei, and that's it?
That's it, I think, for the skin.
Okay, there was, so I got shochet, mafshit, right? Moleach, mamachek, okay. And they, right. What about mamachko? Do I have mamachko? Mamachko is, right, smoothing down. And machadko, right, okay. So the one that I'm missing here is the Gemara is going to say, the Gemara, that this last one you have on number 40. See number 40?
Yeah.
Skip all the numbers on your chart.
Sirtut.
Did I say it was?
Is this typo?
Yeah, there is a typo. There's a typo. There's a typo between 30 and 31. That's what I got me confused.
Yeah, because
Okay, there's mamachko, and then there is mechadcho.
Mechadcho, yeah.
Right, so there's two mamachkos on 31. The 31 is supposed to be mechadcho. That's why I was missing one.
Yeah.
Mamachko is smoothing, mechadcho is cutting.
The English is different. The Hebrew is the
Right,
same.
okay?
Mine says a mechad. Yeah, mine
The English
says.
is
Oh, the
different.
Hebrew letters,
Hebrew
Hebrew letters,
letters.
right. Okay, you can see the English, okay. Yeah, okay, there we go. So 31 is mechatcho, and it says mechatcho in the transliteration, but it's a mistake in the Hebrew. However, the number 40, remember I told you that number 28 and 29, the Gemara will say is the same thing, salting and tanning. They're really two words for the same process, just maybe different chemicals. So the Gemara says, you're right. They're really 28 and 29 is the same one. So that takes us down no longer 39, that makes it down to 38. So the Gemara says, we're going to add you one more, which is called masartate, which is sketching lines onto leather. So that may be if you are going to sketch, not writing. We didn't get to writing yet, but this is sketching lines in. What can you compare it to? Did you ever get an aliyah in the Torah? Of course you did.
Yeah.
You look at the Torah, there are scratches on the Torah.
Yeah.
Same thing on tefillin, same thing on the mezuzah. That's called sirtut. There's a halacha that when you write, you have to write the letters on a line to keep them straight. So it's not a visible line, it's a scratched in line. that was needed as well to cut the fat, to cut the skins. Once again, I told you the cutting was accurate cutting. To make sure it was cut accurately, and especially if you were making strips, you were masartate into where you wanted to cut. Okay, you may have done the same thing with lumber. Either put a line there or put some kind of scribing into the lumber itself where you cut it.
When they make coats, they have fur collars. So that's the way they do it.
With a
It's part of tailoring.
Very precise.
well, I imagine a tailor works with some kind of template, some kind of what do you call it, pattern,
Yeah.
right? So that's the same thing. You've got to take the fabric and you cut the fabric to the size. But it's surely going to be the same thing with the skin. The skin doesn't really allow you to make a mistake and sew it back together. So right, so you have this, you have to work on the skin. It's got to be malleable, usable, and then you have to mark it off where you want to cut it. Then you cut it. So at any rate, so sirtut is the one that's not mentioned here. Masarto, that really takes the place of one of the two tanning ones. Okay. Mabed is oro, mamachko, mamchatcho, and then we come. So that's all about the skins. That's all one set. So what we've had now until now, we've had the process for the dyes, which also the process for baking bread. We've had the process for weaving, or the fabric making the weaving in the loom. That's using the wool. Then after that, we've had sewing. Then after that, we've had now working with the skins. Okay, and now we come to a sundry list of a few couplets or two or threes together go together, and that takes us now to 32. So far, so good. Yeah. Okay. Kotev shtei otiot. That's writing two letters. Not one letter, two symbols together.
Shame.
Well, shame. In other words, and the Gemara will talk about the fact of, let's say you wanted to write a longer letter, a longer name, but you wrote shame, Mishimon. Instead of writing Shimon, you stopped after mem. I know that the mem is a final mem versus a square mem, but that would be the same thing. Or dun in place of Daniel. I know the nun is different, but still the word. Okay, you can probably come up with other examples. But you make two letters that are together that make sense. You don't have to make a word, but they have to be. It can't be just random letters. So, for example, Aleph, Bet, Gimel,
That would
Dalet,
be Drabanan, right?
and one letter would be Chatzi Shir. It's probably also Chatzi Shir is less than what you normally do.
It's not a word.
It's not a word, right?
It's not a word, but it's
Yeah, okay.
the Rabbanan,
Right.
not the right, the
Correct.
Rabbanan.
Yes, correct. Okay.
What's the writing?
So the writing on the Mishkan is, you have here this picture of this handy-dandy Levi who is writing Aleph and Bet on two boards that are sitting next to each other, and therefore they marked them, so when they would put them back together, they would come out the same way. For those who ever built, like a sukkah, exactly like the sukkah.
But are we saying that the Raisa,
Yeah.
you write two letters that don't make a word?
No, they have to. It's
That's
actually
okay?
two letters next to each other. But what I guess was confusing things. I meant to say that if you want to write a longer word and you stopped when you wrote a shorter word, that's still considered writing a word. Okay, we'll talk about ksiva when we come to it. But really, two letters together, they can't be far. They have to make sense that they go together. Right?
Together.
Right?
But
But
they don't have to make sense
They
together.
don't, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, correct, but you have to be intentionally writing those two letters to go one after the other. Let's say you want to put 1 next to 11 for some reason. Yeah, I suppose so. Okay?
How far did they go in the Mishkan? I mean, to write a letter, you got to lift a pen, some kind of instrument. Why isn't that considered a malacha? Why, like?
So actually, it's the actual action. Lifting is only going to be a muktzah of the item that's used now to write. There's nothing, in other words,
It's not the malach.
muktzah is only drabanan, right? There's nothing wrong with picking up an item, minat Torah. The actual, what's wrong is doing something that's creative, changing. I'm making a change on the material. In this case, it's not actually changing, it's simply writing to mark and delineate. Right? So that's kotim. Now it's less changed than some of the other things like tochein or fire or building and something like that, but it still is considered something that was necessary to work on the material to prepare for the Mishkan. The actual instruments, there's nothing wrong with the instruments really. What's wrong is using the instruments to do the malacha. Muktzah come along and said, because we're afraid you might pick up the pen and write, so therefore the pen itself is muktzah. Okay? Make sense? Okay. So you got kotev shtei otiot, and then you've got the destruction in terms of writing it. Mochek amanat lichto. You're erasing in order to write. Let's say you wanted to write 1 and 2, and you kind of realized you wrote 1 and 3, or you kind of want to restack the boards in a different way. So you need to erase to rewrite. So erasing is not going to be a malacha, but erasing in order to write again is going to be a malacha. Okay. So, for example, if you wrote one letter. It's interesting. What I will say, what if you wrote one very big letter? Instead of writing two small letters, I wrote one big letter. So it's not the malacha. What, on the other hand, if I erased a letter, but I got room to put two letters in this place? That is a malacha, because it's not erasing, it's erasing in order to write. So you got these funny kinds of things that come up in the Gemara. Okay, but it's two letters minimally. Okay, so kotev and mochek. Once again, one is the flip of the other in order to do the other. Amanat lichtov shtei otiyot, and then we come to bona and soter, building and knocking down, and then we have the mechabe and mavir. And it looks like it actually should be the other way around, mavir and mechabe, right? Lighting a fire. And Mechabe is putting it out. It almost looks like they're reversed, but may or may not be true. Mechabe, now Mavir, I understand what the malacha is. I can use it for cooking. I'm going to change something. What should be wrong about putting the fire out?
It has to be in order to.
I'm putting it out in order to make a fire.
To produce charcoal.
So the chart here gave it away. There you go. Thanks, Archie. Okay. So the Mechabe 36 says, I'm extinguishing in order to produce charcoal, putting out the fire, reducing its intensity. In order to, with the real malacha in our Torah was to produce something. Now, for those of us who have gas grills, go back to the days when you had the old charcoal briquettes, right? Briquettes. I don't know where I came from. It was.
Yeah, I love it.
You still use them. Okay, there we go.
Use briquette. That's
Well, whatever it is. But I'm saying, but putting out, in other words, they needed charcoal in many cases to keep the embers going. So it was advantageous to have charcoal on hand. In our society, it'd be terribly disadvantageous to have charcoal on hand. It's pretty messy and pretty dirty, right? But they had it in order to work with fire and keep fires going. So charring wood was actually a commodity that was actually good. I think there's one story about meeting someone who was destined to be in Gehenna a whole week, and someone met him, and he was a charcoal carrier. He was carrying charcoal, and you can imagine it's dirty work, like being a chimney sweep. Some kind of story. I don't remember where that was exactly. And but the bottom line is that was a creative kind of reason to putting it out. So it's putting out for some use. If you're just going to put the fire out, it really, for its own purpose, it may not be actually a Minatora prohibition.
I was going to say today.
Right. Today, call the fire department. It's not really a
But if it's purely destructive, it wouldn't be Drabanan either, right?
Right. It may purely destructive might be Drabanan. Yes.
No, would not be Drabanan.
It would be Drabanan. Would not be Doraisa.
But purely destructive.
Why
is that a malacha in the first place? Why would that be a malacha Drabanan?
Poking a hole in the...
Because it looks like a malacha that you would be doing in a different format to make charcoal. It's the same kind of action. But we don't make charcoal today. But there's still the kind of action. Okay.
You destroyed in another context. It wouldn't be. Let's say you destroy a wall.
It's probably prohibited in the Rabbanan. Yes, don't try this on Shabbos. Okay, no, I'm sure that soser is a rabbinic prohibition on Shabbos. You walk around with a sledgehammer, you start knocking walls down, or take not a sledgehammer, you kick over a wall or something
in a purely destructive manner without any positive thing coming from it at all.
Yes. Rabbinically, it will be prohibited. I'm quite sure.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
You weren't going to do it anyway.
You weren't going to do it anyway.
I thought it was okay.
Okay, I think it's a rabbinic prohibition. Okay, I believe I'm correct. So we have mechaber and mavir, or mavir and mechaber. You notice how the order in the chart you have is reversed. Okay, and that takes us down to the very last two, which one is makam patish, and that's number 38, which is let's just deal with number 39 first, and that's the last one. Motzi mashut lashut is the 39th, which is carrying in or carrying out. That's we spent the whole first parak, or a good chunk of the first parak on. And the number 38 is makva patish. Makva patish, I don't know if we really talked about it, but it can mean a lot of things. It's really the final ending of everything that you're going to do. And so there are different ways to understand it. There you have a picture here of a guy. I'll show you one interpretation that they have. Well, we just take a look at these pictures, wrap this up here. We have this guy, here's the Mr. Sledgehammer man. He's the soser, and then you got Mr. Bona. And then you have over here, this is Mavir. Which one is Mavir? Okay, this is Mavir. He's lighting the fire, and this is Machab. He's putting out the fire, and here he's making charcoal. Makam Patish, this guy here, you see him? Mm-hmm. What's he doing?
He's doing final.
He looks like the guy on the Viking ship, right? Boom, 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 boom. Okay.
You can't tell what it is.
You can't tell what he's doing, but actually what the picture is that he's doing, this is what one of the interpretations of the Gemara is. He's actually banging on the anvil, not directly on what he's really working. What he's really working on is a very thin gold plate that was put on top of the, I believe, the riot, the poles that were around the Mishkan, and these were very thin gold plating, and they banged them out. They made the gold plating very thin by banging on it. To make sure that you didn't break this plating or crack the plating, you had to make sure that your hammer was completely flat. If there was an imperfection on that, right, what would happen to when you bang it on? You probably would go right through it. Right, so he is banging. So what he's doing basically is he's like flattening a hammer. So every bang, 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 bang. That's makabah patish. But it's a malacha that's an assistive type of malacha for what's being done. So it's not really, the malacha here is probably, I don't know, I'm not sure what the malacha would be. That's one interpretation of makabah patish. The other interpretation is makabah patish becomes the end of what you're doing. So, for example, the Gemara is going to talk about building a building. Like the last row of bricks is going to be makabah patish. The rest of the rows of bricks are going to be boneh. And from what I've seen in terms of reading and learning about makabah patish in Masechah Shabbos, makabah patish is like silly putty. Or like clay, you can mold it into anything. If you don't know which malacha it really is, and it's at the end, they'll say, "Oh, it's makabah patish." I'm not trying to be facetious, but that's why you'll notice what they have here in the translations or the examples. They say one is hitting the hammer on the anvil to smooth it after one's work is finished. That's the end. The last thing you've done before you put your tools away is you bang it out. Like if you go out and cut your hedges, the last thing you do to your tools is make sure they're dry. Right, that's Rashi's interpretation. Another interpretation, Tosafos says, is the final blow with the hammer, the final touches on completing an object. Another interpretation is striking a stone in a quarry to detach it. You've actually knocked the stone, you've separated the last bang that makes the stone pop off the quarry. That's going to be makabah patish, which becomes an example of the last thing you're doing. So there's a number of examples of makabah patish, but it's not really one specific thing. It's the last hammer blow. In this example, there's a different kind of makabah patish, which the Gemara and others will suggest, which is really about kind of flattening out the hammer. Every time you're doing this, every couple of bangs, you're doing a separate bang to flatten out and make sure the hammer is exact. So those are really the 49 malachos. And so you know what? Let's just do one line in the Gemara. I don't want to say we didn't start the Gemara. Okay, we'll do it again next week. Says the Gemara in the first line, next page, minyan alamali. Why do I need to say how many of the malachos there are? Count them up, right? There are 39 malachos. That's 40 minus 1. Why does the Mishnah have to tell me 40 minus 1? Why not just count them up? Right? So the Gemara says, in order to tell me, if you did all 39, each one you would get an avera for. Each one you'd have to bring a korban chatas. Each one you'd be liable for. So in other words, it's very different. And by the way, that's so unique for Shabbos. Normally you think of different malachos. Right? So it's one Easter for the whole yontif. This has got one Shabbos, and you've got 39 different averos, so 39 different things that you can do. That each one can be a separate korban. It doesn't exist anywhere else. Right? You don't say you're going to get, chametz, that you get chametz, and then you get pasta, you get an avera, and then you get an avera for eating, a cereal. Right? It's one avera for chametz. Right? And this case is all different. So that's why it stands out and unusual and separate and lists all 39 together. Now take us till the end of today, and we'll catch you up. Next week we get right into the Gemara. Okay? Any questions? No. Okay. I think, by the way, I sent you a copy of the chart in my email today. So therefore, but we'll keep copies here to go around.
From what?
I don't know. Every year.